Soon may the wellerman come to bring us sugar and tea and rum. One day when the stripping is done, we'll take our leave and go. Ahoy, mateos! Today is March 6th, 2026, 7:43 a.m., and I'm going to get right into the issue. When institutions closed, what actually replaced them? Today we're going to talk about something most families in the disability community don't discover until they are already deep inside the system. And this is the question: what really replaced institutions when they were closed? Because when I was raising my son, Pirate AJ Hook, the message we were always told was simple. Institutions were bad. Community inclusion would replace them. Families would be supported. Safety, dignity, and oversight would be stronger in the community. But the longer I've lived inside this system, the more I'm starting to realize something very important. The buildings may have closed, but the structure of control didn't disappear. It just spread out across many different agencies. And that story begins with a major Supreme Court decision called Olmstead versus LC. This case interpreted the Americans with Disabilities Act and ruled that people with disabilities have a right to live in the most integrated community setting possible. In other words, the government could no longer place people in institutions if they could live in the community instead. And that sounds like a wonderful idea. And for many people, it absolutely was. But here's the part people don't talk about very often. When those institutions closed, the government didn't simply remove the system, they rebuilt the system in pieces. Instead of one institution, we now have group homes, provider agencies, case managers, guardianship courts, Medicaid waiver programs, oversight boards, investigators, compliance departments, financial reporting requirements, and every one of those pieces has a little bit of authority, but no one has complete responsibility. And when something goes wrong, every part of the system can point to another part of the system. That is something policy researchers sometimes call institutional drift. The institution didn't disappear, it just drifted into the community in smaller pieces. Now here's where families like mine run directly into conflict. My son cannot evaluate risk. He cannot navigate complex adult environments. He cannot fully understand consent in complicated situations. He cannot legally advocate for himself. So a court recognizes something very obvious. He needs a guardian. But at the exact same time, the rest of the system says something very different. The rest of the system says something very different. They say autonomy must come first. They say he's an adult. They say he has the right to make choices. And if I speak up without legal guardianship paperwork, suddenly I'm told I have no standing, no authority, no voice. Think about that contradiction for a moment. The court says he needs protection, but the system says he has full autonomy. Both of these things cannot exist at the same time. And families are the ones stuck in the middle of that policy collision. Meanwhile, agencies can be paid, administrators can be paid, professional guardians can be paid, providers can be paid, case managers can be paid, but the mother who has spent decades caring for her child, she has to prove herself again and again and again. And sometimes she has to sacrifice her own financial survival just to remain involved. That is a reality many people outside this world simply don't understand. Raising a profoundly disabled child is not just parenting. It becomes a full-time career. It means medical appointments, therapies, emergency situations, paperwork, advocacy meetings, insurance battles, and years of navigating systems most people never see. Many mothers never build a traditional career because they're already working one. And when their child becomes an adult, instead of finally receiving stability, they often enter a maze of regulations and policy contradictions. And here's the most important part of what I'm saying today. This is not an argument against civil rights. Civil rights protections for disabled people are essential. But civil rights frameworks must also recognize reality. Some individuals can truly not evaluate risk. Some individuals truly cannot navigate complex adult situations safely. Some individuals truly need someone to speak for them. And when that is the case, the system must allow families to do that without pushing them out economically or legally. Because if families cannot maintain guardianship, if the stress becomes too great, if the financial strain becomes too much, then eventually another group fills that role. Professional guardians, agency administrators, institutional structures that operate far away from the daily life of the person involved. And that might work in some situations, but it should never become the quiet default simply because families are overwhelmed. My son cannot file a legal complaint. He cannot testify in court. Okay, this says that, but he could testify in court, definitely. He can talk. He cannot analyze policy contradictions. He cannot challenge a system that fails him, but I can. And that is exactly why Rogue Mother Rising exists. Not to attack civil rights. Not to fight integration. Not to oppose guardianship. Well, actually I am. I think I should be his guardian. I'm his mother. But to shine a light on the policy contradictions that leave profoundly disabled adults caught in the middle. Because if the system truly believes someone needs protection, then it must also support the people who are trying to provide that protection. And right now, far too many families are being left to carry that weight alone. That's why I'm speaking. That's why I'm documenting the journey. That's why Pirate A.J. Hook and I will keep sailing these waters together. Because the conversation about disability rights must include every level of disability, not just the ones that are easiest to represent. Ahoy, mateys. I'll see you on our next sail. Have a wonderful weekend. And I feel like I'm getting somewhere in my advocacy, that I'm really understanding what's going on. There is truly no true safety and protection for people like my son, and I intend to change that. See you next sail. Ahoy, mateos. Raise the mast.